Okay, so version 7.3 of the Tycho software has just now been released, so I thought I would go ahead and do a quick overview of the new features that you can expect to see in this version. Okay, so the first item of interest here is that you can now specify a folder of dark frames as opposed to explicitly specifying a particular dark frame. So in other words, Tycho will now automatically choose the correct image in that folder based on exposure time. So that's kind of a nice convenience feature to have. The next feature is the ability to keep the observations window open during a reset. So another nice convenience feature there. Next we have the ability to easily add custom orbital elements, and I'll show what that looks like in more detail later. Next feature here is it offers improved matching of comets. So this is achieved by having a larger search window, and this is made as an optional configuration just because it does somewhat increase the search time. Next we have additional commands have been added to the AutoRun override file, so if you like to do a lot of scripting, this will come in handy. And I've also now migrated Tycho to use version 6 of the Windows Common Controls. So the look and feel will be a bit different in this version, but the reason for this change is to support some other features. Next item being, for example, the Ctrl+A shortcut, other keyboard shortcuts that you would expect to work. These have now been included as standard features with this version 6 of Common Controls. And it also ties in with this last item here, which is that it fixes a selection bug that would occur in Windows 10. So with that, let's go ahead and take a look at some of these features in more detail. Okay, so as I mentioned earlier, you can now specify a folder containing the dark frames. So the option here now allows you to auto-select from a directory, and if you choose that option, Tycho will then interpret the path here as being a path to a folder as opposed to a path to a dark frame. So again, this is another nice feature to have, and especially if you run Tycho in an automated fashion, it will now automatically choose the correct frame based on exposure time. Okay, so the next feature I mentioned is the ability to keep the observations window open during a reset. So if you're familiar with Tycho, you know that whenever you close out of a data set, it wants to close everything, it wants to reset everything to keep the environment clean. And that's normally what you want it to do, but under certain circumstances, if you want to have a whole bunch of observations of different objects and even different fields of view, if you want all of those observations under a single file, then you need to keep the observations window open. So if you want to enable this option, you go to Settings, Keep Open During Reset. So it's as easy as that. You just have to enable it through the setting menu. Okay, so the next feature I mentioned is the ability to easily add custom orbital elements. So in the previous version, if you wanted to have custom objects show up in the known object window, you had to manually add those orbital elements to that file. So with this version, it's a bit easier. The way this works is that you would have your observations of an object pasted into the text form here, and then through this menu here, you then choose this option, so add to mpcorb.custom, and when you invoke that option, it then computes the orbital elements associated with this set of observations and then adds them to the custom orbital element file, and therefore that object will then show up in the known object window. Okay, so also new in this version is that it offers improved matching of comets. So in the previous version with the known object window, there might have been a comet that is in fact within the field of view of the image, but the known object window might not have indicated it as such. And the reason for that is that the initial computation of its position, its approximate position, was simply too far off from where it actually is, and so it did not make the cutoff for being included in the overall list of objects to be processed. So the enhancement here is that you can now choose this option to use a larger search window, and this works quite well, and it will indeed solve the issue, but it will also tend to slow down the search to some amount. And the way to mitigate that, to speed the search back up, is that there is now also another new option to run parallel instances of Find Orb. So if you have a multi-core processor, then you can choose this option here to have multiple instances of that program running, and therefore you can then regain the search speed that would otherwise have been reduced with this larger search window. Okay, so next up we have the new key value pairs that have been added for the AutoRun override file. So this is particularly useful for those who like to do some scripting to automate the processing of data sets. So these are the new key value pairs here. And the way this works is that you can either leave them as current value, and if you do that, then Tycho will simply assume the values that have been saved in the configuration. Otherwise, you can change the parameter value. For example, if you want to explicitly invoke the resize module, then you would set the value to true, and then you can also specify the parameters for the new image size information. So again, this is another nice feature to have, especially if you do a lot of scripting work. And finally, one more enhancement is that Tycho will now use version 6 of the Windows common controls. So on the left, as you can see, the old version, the user interface with the buttons, and on the right we have the new version. So the user interface is a bit different, not overly dramatically different, but it is a bit noticeable. But the main reason for doing this is not just for looks and appearances, but to add support for basic functionality. So as you can see on this slide, for example, Ctrl+A now works with regular edit boxes. So these kind of keyboard shortcuts are enabled by default with version 6 of the common controls. And in addition to providing this kind of basic functionality, this also happens to fix a bug that would occur on Windows 10. So some of you might have noticed if you're on Windows 10 and you try to select items in a list control, that doing so would tend to magically teleport the cursor to a corner of the screen. This is very weird behavior, and I have no idea why it would occur, other than it just happened with Windows 10. And so some issue with Windows, but it was fixed by migrating to version 6 of the common controls. So overall, these are the enhancements that you can expect to see in this version of Tycho. So thank you for watching, and see you next time.